Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we are opening a file that feels, I don't know, less like a philosophy lecture and more like a warning label for the entire human race.
That's a good way to put it.
We are tackling a figure who is, frankly, the bad boy of 17th century thought. We're talking about a man whose ideas were so controversial, so unsettling, that for a long time, his name was basically a dirty word in polite society.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about Thomas Hobbes.
It is a name that inevitably comes up whenever you talk about power or government or just, the darker alleys of human psychology. But you're right, he was a pariah. If you called someone a Hobbes in the 1670s, you weren't complimenting their intellect.
No.
You were calling them a godless, cynical monster.
Which, I have to admit, makes me like him already. But usually people just know the catchphrases. They know nasty, brutish, and short. They know the Leviathan, and they kind of leave it at that.
Exactly. And the mission for this deep dive is to get past the bumper stickers. We have a massive stack of notes here, biographical details, the dense text of Leviathan itself, accounts of his legendary and, frankly, petty feuds, and the bloody history of the English Civil War.
Right.
We want to understand why he thought the world was such a terrifying place and why he thought the only solution was a totalitarian monster he called the Leviathan.
And it seems like to understand that fear, we had to go right back to the beginning. Literally, to the day he was born. April 5, 1588.
The setting is incredibly cinematic. You have to picture England in a state of absolute panic. This isn't just a rainy Tuesday.
Oh.
The Spanish Armada is approaching. The most powerful invasion fleet in the world is sailing up the channel to conquer England, and the whole country is bracing for what looks like the apocalypse.
The tension is just off the charts. National anxiety level at 1,000,000.
1,000,000, yeah. And in Westport, Wiltshire, Hobbes's mother hears the news of the approaching Armada. She is so utterly terrified by the prospect of invasion that she goes into labor prematurely.
So he is literally born into a national panic attack.
Precisely. Hobbes himself later wrote a famous line about this in his autobiography. He said, "My mother gave birth to twins, myself and fear."
Myself and fear. Wow, that really sets the tone, doesn't it? It's not just a witty anecdote to break the ice at parties.
Not at all.
It feels like the thesis statement for his entire life.
It really is. Fear wasn't just an emotion for Hobbes. It was the engine of his philosophy. It was, for him, the fundamental reality of human existence. If you look at his life, from that very first day, he is constantly running from chaos, running from violence, and trying to build this mental fortress to keep it all out.
He's trying to solve the problem of fear.
That's his whole project.
And it wasn't just the Spanish Armada providing the chaos. His own family situation was pretty unstable, right? I was looking at the notes on his father, Thomas Hobbes Sr., and this is not exactly the picture of a dignified Stoic clergyman.
No, not at all. Far from it. His father was the vicar of Charlton and Westport, but the records we have suggest he was uneducated and, to quote one source, he disesteemed learning.
He disesteemed learning. What does that even mean for a vicar?
It means he could probably read the service, and that was about it. He wasn't a scholar, he wasn't an intellectual, he was, by all accounts, a bit of a hothead.
And that leads to the inciting incident for the family.
It does. It came when Thomas Sr. got into a fight.
A theological debate, a scholarly disagreement.
No, a physical fight, a brawl with another clergyman, right outside his own church.
Wait. He got into a fist fight with another priest right outside the church doors.
Yes, in the churchyard, of all places. And the scandal was so bad that he was excommunicated and forced to flee London.
And in doing so, he just abandons the family.
He abandoned them. He left his wife and 3 kids, including young Thomas, behind to fend for themselves, just vanished.
That is heavy. So Hobbes is abandoned by his father because of a violent, irrational outburst that has to shape your view of human nature.
How could it not?
You see authority figures, people who were supposed to be moral leaders, behaving like thugs. You learn that the people in charge aren't necessarily good or even rational.
It absolutely does. It reinforces that idea that underneath the robes, underneath the titles, people are volatile. They're driven by passions, not by reason. But, as is often the case in these stories, a savior stepped in.
A relative.
Hobbes had a wealthy uncle named Francis.
The glove manufacturer.
Well, that's the one. Francis was a successful glover, quite well off, with no family of his own, and he took over the care and education of young Thomas. And this is crucial.
Right.
Because without Uncle Francis's glove money, we probably never would have heard of Thomas Hobbes. He would have just been another poor kid in Wiltshire with an abandoned family.
Because that money bought him a top-tier education. He goes to school in Malmesbury, then a private school, and eventually he heads to Oxford, Magdalen Hall. Now, I imagine a future philosopher would be in heaven at Oxford, but the notes say he wasn't exactly a model student.
He was a good pupil in terms of his ability. I mean, he was brilliant, but he hated the curriculum. He found it profoundly boring.
Okay, so you have to understand, at that time, Oxford was dominated by scholastic logic.
Scholasticism, we hear that term a lot. Break it down for us. What was he actually sitting through in class? What were these debates about?
It was very Aristotle-heavy, very traditional, and very, very focused on abstract theological definitions. They would spend weeks, literally weeks, debating the essence of an object or the nature of substance versus accident. Give me an example. What's a scholastic argument?
Okay, so they might argue about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, or they debate the metaphysics of the Eucharist. To Hobbes, it felt like word games. He thought it was just jargon designed to confuse people and that it had absolutely nothing to do with the real physical world.
So he basically checked out and followed his own curriculum.
Pretty much. He wasn't interested in the stuffy lectures. He was spending his time at bookbinders, looking at maps, reading histories of exploration. This is the first real sign of his intellectual rebellion.
Right.
He was rejecting the wisdom of the ancients, specifically Aristotle, which was a dangerous, almost heretical thing to do in a university setting at that time. He thought the old philosophy was just cobwebs that needed to be swept away.
So he graduates from Cambridge in 1608, and then he lands a job that basically sets him up for life. He becomes a tutor.
But not just any tutor. He is recommended to the Cavendish family, the Earls of Devonshire. This is one of the most powerful, wealthy, and influential families in all of England.
And this wasn't a short gig. He was with them for life.
Practically. He started by tutoring William Cavendish, who would become the second Earl of Devonshire, and then later he tutored his son, the third Earl. He even had a hand in tutoring the generation after that.
Right.
This connection was his lifeline.
They gave him everything.
Everything. A massive library, financial security, powerful protection, and most importantly, travel.
The Grand Tour.
Exactly. Between 1610 and 1615, he travels all over Europe with the young William Cavendish. And this is where the real transformation happens. He leaves the stuffy, backward-looking atmosphere of Oxford and steps into the vibrant, intellectual world of the continent.
This is where he starts moving away from just philosophy.
Yeah.
And gets deep into science and critical methods. The scientific revolution is happening in real time all around him.
It is. He's in France, he's in Italy. He's meeting people who are actually measuring the world, not just arguing about what Aristotle said about it. And there is one meeting in particular on a later tour that stands out in all the sources.
He met Galileo.
He met Galileo. In 1636, he visited him in Florence.
While Galileo was under house arrest by the Inquisition.
Yes, for saying the Earth moves around the sun.
Imagine that scene. You have Hobbes, this guy who is desperately looking for a new, certain way to explain the world, meeting the very man who would revolutionize the understanding of the physical universe.
And Galileo had done it with math. He had shown that the planets move according to precise, predictable, mathematical laws of motion, inertia, velocity.
Right.
The universe wasn't being pushed around by angels or mystical forces. It was matter in motion, and you could understand it.
And Hobbes has an aha moment, a life-changing insight.
A massive one. He thinks, if we can explain the movement of planets with geometry and physics, why can't we explain human beings the same way?
So humans as matter in motion.
Precisely. He starts to view human beings not as souls with divine sparks, but as biological machines. We are matter. We are driven by push and pull. Desire or appetite pushes us towards something. Fear or aversion pulls us away from something else.
It's just mechanics.
It's all mechanics. And if you can understand the mechanics of human nature, you can build a perfect state, a machine state, a government that works as predictably as a clock.
So he wants to apply geometry to politics.
Mm.
He wants to solve the problem of society like it's a math equation.
That is his grand ambition. He wants a political science that is as certain and undeniable as a geometric proof. If A equals B and B equals C, then we must have a king. He wants to remove all the guesswork, all the emotion, all the religion.
Just cold, hard logic.
The hardest logic he can find.
But before he can finish this grand logical theory, reality intervenes again. The chaos he's always running from comes home.
The English Civil War.
Okay, let's unpack the context here because it's crucial. We are moving into the 1640s.
Mm-hmm.
England is a tinderbox.
Yeah.
You have the parliamentarians on one side, the royalists on the other. It's a religious and political power struggle that is going to tear the country apart.
And Hobbes, with his incredible sensitivity to danger, remember the twins, himself and fear, he smells the smoke before the fire really takes hold. In 1640, the political situation deteriorates rapidly. The short parliament is dissolved, the long parliament begins, and Hobbes feels that he is in danger.
Why him specifically?
He had written a treatise not for publication, but it was circulating in manuscript form. It was called The Elements of Law, Natural and Politic, and it was a very forceful defense of the king's absolute authority.
And in the current climate, with Parliament challenging the king, having your name on a document that says the king is the boss, period, was a dangerous thing.
Very dangerous. Parliament was flexing its muscles, and men who supported the king were being targeted. So, true to his nature, Hobbes flees. He goes to Paris in November 1640, and he doesn't come back for 11 years.
So he sits out the entire Civil War in exile.
He does. But he isn't just sitting around in Parisian cafes eating croissants. He is watching the news from home with absolute horror. He sees his country descending into the exact anarchy he always feared.
It wasn't just a political disagreement. It was a bloodbath.
It was a total societal breakdown. Neighbors fighting neighbors, the breakdown of law, of order, of everything. And eventually, the unthinkable happens. The king, Charles I, is captured, tried, and executed.
Regicide. They chop off the head of the king.
For a man like Hobbes, who believed in absolute undivided authority, seeing the head of the state literally chopped off was like watching the sun fall out of the sky. It confirmed his absolute worst fears. When authority crumbles, society dissolves into a war of all against all.
And while he's in Paris, he actually gets a very high-profile student, right?
Yes. In 1646, he becomes the mathematical instructor to the young Prince of Wales, the future Charles II, who was also living in exile after his father's defeat.
That is a connection that will save his neck later on. But let's focus on the writing. This exile period is the crucible for his masterpiece, Leviathan.
It is. You have to understand, Leviathan isn't written in a quiet, peaceful ivory tower. It's a survival guide for a shattered nation. Hobbes is looking at the carnage of the Civil War and asking, how do we stop this from ever happening again?
And there was a personal element of urgency, too. He nearly died of an illness in 1647, right?
Yes. He was bedridden for 6 months with a severe fever. He thought he was dying. And I think that brush with death added this incredible sense of urgency. He needed to get the solution down on paper. He felt he had the answer to perpetual peace, and he had to publish it before he or his country died for good.
So let's dive into the book itself. Leviathan, published in 1651. It starts with this famous thought experiment. He strips everything away: government, laws, police, society. He deletes it all to see what's left.
He wants to see what human nature is in its raw, unfiltered state. He calls it the state of nature.
Right. And unlike some other philosophers who think, oh, without rules, people would be noble savages living in harmony, Hobbes has a very different view.
He has a materialist view. Remember, we are machines driven by appetites and aversions. In the state of nature, every single person has what he calls a right to everything.
A right to everything. That sounds liberating.
It sounds great for about 5 seconds until you realize everyone else has it too. If I want your food, I have a right to take it. If you want my shelter, you have a right to take it. There is no mine and mine. There is no property. There is just, can I take it and can I keep it?
And since everyone generally wants the same things, food, safety, resources,
you get conflict. Constant, unavoidable conflict. Hobbes famously calls it bellum omnium contra omnes, the war of all against all.
And it's not that everyone is evil necessarily. That's a common misreading.
It's a very common misreading. He's not saying we're all psychopaths. He's saying the situation itself, the logic of the situation, makes us killers. Imagine there are 2 of you and 1 apple. There's no referee. The rational thing to do is fight for it.
And because there's no referee, there can be no trust. This is the key concept. Diffidence.
Exactly. Even if you are a nice person, you can't trust that I'm a nice person. You have to assume I might kill you in your sleep to take your stuff. So your best strategy, your most rational move is to kill me first.
A preemptive strike.
It becomes a spiral of paranoia and violence. It's the prisoner's dilemma played out on a global societal scale. Nobody wants this war, but everyone is forced to participate in it to survive.
And this leads to that famous, devastating passage. I have it here. He describes what is missing in this state. He says, in such condition, there is no place for industry, no culture of the earth, no navigation, no commodious building, no arts, no letters, no society.
He is describing the total collapse of civilization. You can't build a house because someone will take it. You can't plant a crop because someone will steal it. No infrastructure, no trade, no art, just moment-to-moment survival.
And then the kicker, the line everyone knows.
Yeah.
And which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death and the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Nasty, brutish, and short. It is one of the most powerful and bleak descriptions of human misery ever written. And for Hobbes, looking across the channel at the Civil War, this wasn't an abstract fantasy. He was seeing it happen. He was saying, this is the default setting of humanity if we don't have a lid on us.
Okay, so if the state of nature is a horror show, how do we get out? What is the escape hatch?
Reason. Fear drives us into this mess, but reason guides us out. We are rational animals. We realize that living in constant fear of being murdered is a terrible way to live. We want safety. We want to be able to farm our land without someone stealing the harvest.
We want to live.
We want to live. So we make a deal, a contract, the famous social contract.
How does the deal work? What are the terms and conditions?
The first step is that we all agree to lay down our right to everything. I agree not to kill you for your shoes, provided you agree not to kill me for mine. It's a mutual disarmament. We give up our natural liberty to do whatever we want.
But wait, that feels flimsy.
Yeah.
If I promise not to kill you, what stops me from breaking that promise the moment your back is turned and I see an opportunity?
That is the crucial point. That's the million-dollar question. And Hobbes has a famous line for that, too. He says, "Covenants without the sword are but words and of no strength to secure a man at all."
Promises mean nothing if there isn't a force to back them up.
Nothing. You can't trust me. I can't trust you. We need an enforcer, a third party with overwhelming power to punish anyone who breaks the deal.
Enter the Leviathan.
The sovereign. We take all that power we had in the state of nature, the right to judge, the right to punish, the right to make war, and we hand it all over to one central authority, whether it's a man or an assembly of men.
We give all our power to one entity.
We authorize him. We say, you keep the peace, you punish the rule breakers, you hold the sword, and in exchange, we will obey you absolutely.
And the visual for this is iconic. The frontispiece of the book, the cover image.
It is unforgettable. It shows this giant king, a colossal figure, towering over the landscape, holding a sword in one hand and a bishop's crozier in the other.
Symbolizing his control over both civil and religious power.
Exactly. But if you look closely at the engraving, his body isn't made of armor or skin. It is made of thousands and thousands of tiny little people, all facing inward, looking up at the head.
That's us, the citizens.
Yes. We are the Leviathan. We created him from our collective will. We authorized him. He acts with our collective strength. We are the body. He is the soul.
But the catch is, this power has to be absolute, right? Hobbes doesn't want checks and balances. He's not Montesquieu.
He hates checks and balances. He loathes them. He looks at the English Civil War and says, why did this happen? Because power was divided. You had the king on one side, Parliament on the other. You had the church making claims against the state.
When you have two bosses, you have conflict.
You have civil war. For Hobbes, power must be absolute and undivided. The sovereign controls the military, the judiciary, the laws, what can be published, what can be taught in universities, and even the church.
Even a church. That seems like a massive overreach, especially for the 17th century.
Especially the church. Hobbes saw religious disagreement as a primary cause of civil war. If the Pope tells you to do one thing and the king tells you to do another, who do you obey? That division leads to bloodshed.
So the solution?
The sovereign must decide what religious doctrines are to be taught. The sovereign controls the pulpit to ensure that the message is always, always obey the law. Religion becomes a tool of the state to ensure peace.
That seems intense. So let me play devil's advocate. What if the sovereign is a tyrant? What if he's a bad king? Can we revolt? Can we have a revolution?
Yeah.
That's a short answer.
It's an absolute answer. Under Hobbes' system, you cannot revolt. Why? Because you authorized the sovereign. You created him. To attack the sovereign is to attack yourself. It's illogical.
So you're basically attacking the peace you created.
You are voting to return to the state of nature. And more importantly, Hobbes would ask you, is the tyrant worse than the Civil War? Is paying high taxes worse than having your throat cut by your neighbor?
And for him, the answer is always no.
Always no. Any government, no matter how oppressive, is better than the war of all against all. The only time you can resist is if the sovereign tries to kill you directly. The right to self-preservation is the one right you can never give up. But other than that, you obey. You sit down, you pay your taxes, and you obey.
So he publishes this book, Leviathan, in 1651. He probably thought, I have solved politics. Everyone is going to thank me for bringing logic to the chaos.
He might have thought that. He certainly had the ego for it. But in reality, he managed to achieve something truly impressive.
What's that?
He angered absolutely everyone, all sides, all factions.
Okay, let's break down the backlash. Who was mad at him and why?
Well, start with the royalists. These are supposed to be his people. He's in exile with them in Paris. He's teaching the future king. But they hated Leviathan.
Why? I don't get it. He was arguing for an absolute king. That should be their jam.
Yes, but he was arguing for it for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
The royalists believed in the divine right of kings, that God puts the king on the throne and he answers only to God. Hobbes said, no, the people put the king on the throne through a contract because they're scared of dying. That takes all the magic, all the divinity out of it. It makes monarchy a pragmatic solution, not a divine institution.
It makes it transactional. It makes the king an employee of the people's safety in a weird way.
Exactly. And worse, much worse, Hobbes argued that your obligation to obey a sovereign only lasts as long as he can protect you.
Oh.
So if a sovereign loses a war and a new power takes over.
So if the parliamentarians win the Civil War and establish control.
Hobbes' logic implies you should obey them now. Because they're the ones holding the sword. They're the ones who can protect you. This looked like treason to the royalists in exile. They thought he was writing a justification for submitting to Oliver Cromwell and the new revolutionary government back in London.
Wow. So the royalists hate him. What about the church? The Anglicans, the Catholics?
They hated him even more, if that's possible. Oh. Anglicans, Catholics, Presbyterians, they all found something to despise in Leviathan.
It was an equal opportunity offender.
Completely. He subordinated the church to the state, which they hated. He interpreted scripture in a very bizarre, materialistic way that stripped the supernatural out of religion. He just gave off this secularist spirit that terrified them.
It got so bad that he was actually in physical danger in Paris, right, from the English court in exile.
The royalists might have had him arrested, or worse. The French Catholic authorities were also deeply suspicious of the book's irreligious tone. He was effectively banished from the court of the exiled King Charles. So, ironically, the man who fled England to escape the war had to flee back to England in the winter of 1651 because his allies in Paris wanted his head.
That's incredible. He returns to London, submits to Cromwell's Council of State, and is allowed to retire to private life. But the controversy didn't stop. Hobbesism became a thing.
It became a slur. It was a McCarthyism of the 17th century. If you wanted to call someone immoral, atheistic, cynical, or someone who believed might makes right, you called them a Hobbist.
And the atheist label stuck to him like glue for the rest of his life. Was he an atheist?
It is a very complicated question. In the 17th century, the word atheist was a much broader term than it is today. It could just mean you disagreed with the church's official view of divine providence.
It was an all-purpose insult for a heretic.
Exactly. Hobbes himself always claimed to be a Christian. He wrote extensively about scripture, but his theology was, well, it was unique.
Unique how?
Materialism again. For Hobbes, if something exists, it has to have a body. It has to take up space. So he argued that everything is matter, corporeal. That includes the soul. And it even includes God.
He argued that God is made of matter.
Yeah.
That God is a physical being.
He argued that to be a substance means to be a body. He said the phrase incorporeal substance, which theologians use to describe God and the soul, was a contradiction in terms, like calling something a round square. He said it was just meaningless noise.
I can see why the bishops were reaching for the pitchforks.
It was profoundly scandalous. And it got very, very real for him in 1666. After the Restoration, when Charles II came back to the throne, a couple of disasters hit London. The Great Plague, 1665, and then the Great Fire of London in 1666.
And when bad things happen in the 1600s, people look for a sinner to blame.
Exactly. The popular consensus was that God was angry at England for its sins, so Parliament introduced a bill against atheism and profaneness. The committee formed was specifically empowered to receive information about books that tended to atheism in particular. The book of Mr. Hobbes called the Leviathan.
So they named him and his book in a parliamentary bill. That must have triggered his old friend, fear.
He was terrified, genuinely terrified. The penalty for heresy could still be public execution, burning at the stake. He actually burned some of his own papers, compromising manuscripts, just to be safe.
Wow.
He wrote a defense arguing that there was no court in England that could legally try him for heresy anymore. But for a while, he was looking over his shoulder, thinking the authorities were coming for him.
The bill didn't lead to his execution, but it did silence him, didn't it?
It did. The king, his former pupil Charles II, protected him from any real harm. But part of the deal was that Hobbes was forbidden from publishing anything on politics or human conduct in England ever again. He had to print his later works in Amsterdam and have them smuggled into the country.
So we have the political drama, but we also have to talk about the feuds. Because Hobbes seems to have been the kind of guy who just couldn't let an argument go. He was a fighter.
He was incredibly stubborn, and he picked fights with real experts in their own fields. He had this intellectual arrogance where he believed his system, his geometric method, could explain everything better than the specialists.
Let's start with Bishop Bramhall, the fight over free will.
Right. This was the great philosophical battle. Bramhall was a bishop, a strong believer in traditional free will, the idea that humans have a soul that can freely choose between good and evil. Hobbes, true to his mechanistic view, was a strict determinist.
Explain that. Psychological determinism.
Right. He believed that our will is nothing more than the last appetite or aversion we feel before we act. It's the final link in a causal chain. If you choose an apple over a pear, it's not because of some magical free choice. It's because the physical chain of causes and effects in your brain, your hunger, your memories, your body chemistry, resulted in the appetite for the apple being stronger.
So liberty, for Hobbes, just means you're not physically stopped from doing something.
Exactly. Liberty is the absence of external impediments. A river is free to flow downhill. You are free to walk out a door if it isn't locked. It doesn't mean you could have chosen to desire something else.
And this debate got messy.
Very. It was supposed to be a private exchange of papers, but Bramhall's side published it without Hobbes's permission. This led to a public war of words that went on for years. Bramhall wrote a book with the amazing title, The Catching of Leviathan, the Great Whale.
That's a great title.
Hobbes replied with the questions concerning liberty, necessity, and chance, and the records say he replied with astonishing force. He did not hold back.
But if the Bramhall feud was an intellectual heavyweight match, the feud with John Wallis was, well, it was almost a comedy routine.
It is tragic comedy. It really is. John Wallis was a brilliant mathematician, a civilian professor of geometry at Oxford. He was one of the founders of the Royal Society, a legitimate genius.
And Hobbes dabbled in math.
Dabbled is the right word. And Hobbes became convinced that he had solved one of the great impossible problems of ancient geometry, squaring the circle.
Explain what that is for the listener who hasn't touched a protractor in 20 years.
It's the challenge to construct a square with the exact same area as a given circle, using only a compass and a straight edge. For reasons related to the transcendental nature of pi, we now know it's mathematically impossible.
But Hobbes didn't know that.
No, and in his book De Corpore in 1655, he published his solution. He thought he had cracked a 2,000-year-old code.
And what did Wallis, the actual mathematician, think?
Wallis tore him to shreds. He publicly and brutally exposed Hobbes's many mathematical errors. A normal person, a humble person, would have said, "Oops, my bad, I'm a political philosopher, not a geometer, I'll stick to my lane."
But not Hobbes.
Never Hobbes. He doubled down. He refused to admit his mistake. He fought with John Wallis in public print for 25 years.
25 years, over a math problem he got wrong.
A quarter of a century of arguing about geometry. He wrote pamphlet after pamphlet attacking Wallis's absurd geometry and even criticized his rural language, basically making fun of his grammar.
He criticized his grammar in a math debate.
He criticized everything. He called Wallis's work a scab of symbols. It was a flame war, 17th century style, played out in Latin. And Hobbes refused to admit he was wrong until the day he died.
What does that tell us about him? Is it just monumental ego?
It is ego, certainly. He had a massive ego. But I think it's also something deeper. It's his commitment to his system. He wanted everything to fit into his logical, geometric worldview. If his geometry was proven to be flawed, he feared it might imply his politics were flawed too. He needed the world to be logical and solvable, and admitting error was like pulling a thread that could unravel the whole tapestry. He needed certainty in a chaotic world, even if he had to invent it himself.
So despite the stress of being England's most notorious philosopher and fighting with math professors, the man had incredible longevity.
He really did. He lived to be 91 years old in the 17th century. That is extraordinary.
And he had a protector in high places until the end.
King Charles II, his former student. The king couldn't let him publish his controversial works, but he seemed to have a genuine affection for his old tutor. The king famously called Hobbes the bear because he was always being baited into fights by his enemies.
They liked him.
He liked him. He gave Hobbes a pension of £100 a year and kept his portrait in his private closet at court. That royal favor probably kept him from any real harm.
He spent his final years with the Cavendish family at their estates. mostly at Chatsworth House. And he kept working right to the end.
He couldn't stop. It's astounding. At age 84, he wrote his autobiography in Latin verse.
Just showing off.
Completely. And then, because he said he had nothing else to do in his late 80s, he decided to translate both the Iliad and the Odyssey into English verse.
The entire Homeric epics.
Oh.
In his late 80s.
Yes. The notes here call them rugged rhymes. They aren't considered the greatest translations, but the fact that he did it at all is just staggering. It shows his mind was sharp and active until the very end.
And then the end comes.
Yeah.
October 1679. You had a bladder disorder and then a paralytic stroke.
He died at Hardwicke Hall, another Cavendish estate, on December 4, 1679, and his final words were recorded by those around him.
A great leap in the dark.
It's poignant, isn't it? For a man who spent 91 years trying to construct a system of absolute certainty, trying to banish fear with inescapable logic, his final moment is facing the ultimate unknown. A great leap in the dark.
So let's zoom out. We unpack the life, the book, the feuds. What is the legacy? Why does this matter to you, the listener, today? We don't live in an absolute monarchy. Most of us live in democracies. We have rights. Is Hobbes just a historical relic?
Not at all. I think he's more relevant than ever. The historian Christopher Hill put it really well. He said Hobbes fundamentally shifted political thought from obey the state because God says so to obey the state because it's convenient and safer than the alternative.
He secularized politics. He invented the modern state in a way. The idea that government is a tool we create for our own benefit, for our own security.
Exactly. He is the progenitor of what we call social structure. He forces us to ask the really hard, uncomfortable question, why do you follow the law? Is it because you are a naturally good person with a strong moral compass? Or is it because you are terrified of what happens when the law breaks down?
It's the question that comes up every time there's a blackout, a riot, a natural disaster, a collapse of order. How thin is the veneer of civilization? Hobbes says it's paper thin.
And that is why he is still so unsettling. We like to think of ourselves as evolved, moral, cooperative creatures. Hobbes holds up a mirror and sees a scared, selfish animal that needs a cage to feel safe.
He challenges us to accept that the state doesn't exist to make us happy or virtuous or to help us achieve our dreams. Its primary, and maybe only function, is to keep us alive, to stop us from killing each other.
And if you look at the world today, at failed states, at civil wars, at the fragility of order in so many places, Hobbes is always there in the background whispering, I told you so.
So here is the final provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. Next time you are standing in line at the DMV or paying your taxes or grumbling about some bureaucratic rule you have to follow, imagine the alternative.
Imagine the twins. Imagine the fear.
Imagine the nasty, brutish, and short life that Thomas Hobbes ran from for 91 years. And ask yourself, maybe, just maybe, the Leviathan isn't the monster. Maybe the monster is us.
That is the deep dive.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.